Unable to locate Barbara or Sherry, Clem headed back to Barker Ranch, bringing 15-year-old Hugh Rocky Todd from Fountain of the World with him. The teen was apparently infatuated with Katie. To divert attention from the defections, Charlie ramped up his helter-skelter talk. He said the next step was to take over the towns of Shoshone and Trona. He used stolen credit cards to buy supplies for the end of the world. He was obsessed with stories of Rommel's desert raids and his own mystical hole in the barren earth. Diane wrote, "He organized us like troops. During the hottest hours of the day, we hid under camouflage army surplus parachutes. We did reconnaissance missions looking for strategic locations to place dune buggies. Once the sun set, we built lookouts in caves, some hidden behind cactus or between rocks and brush. We searched for the opening to the bottomless pit, and before settling in for the day, the girls and I would take willow branches and wipe away any footprints or dune buggy tracks we might have made." Kathy Gillies offered to kill her own grandmother so she could inherit Myers Ranch and solidify their desert stronghold. Charlie agreed and sent Cappy and 2 others to do the deed. But they got a flat tire and had to turn around. On September 18th, Manson was riding his dune buggy near the Hunter Mountain campsite and discovered 2 very large holes dug in the dirt path he was using, obviously with some kind of earth-moving equipment. He was furious, thinking that someone was trying to prevent him from leaving Barker Ranch or damage his dune buggies. He was driving into Death Valley National Monument on unsanctioned land, and indeed, the Park Service was trying to prevent whoever was desecrating the property from further damage. Charlie soon found the culprit, an earth mover called a Michigan freeloader owned by the Park Service. The family hastened their own demise the following day by committing arson, a spectacularly stupid act. It led to their arrest within 3 weeks. On the 19th, Charlie ordered Gypsy to fill in the holes, while he gathered Scotty, true name Kenneth Brown, Tex, and Clem to torch the freeloader. They stripped it of useful parts, poured gasoline over it, and set it on fire, an act of willful vandalism that had predictable consequences. Park rangers found tire tracks leading to the smoldering metal hulk. They determined that the car driven by the firebugs was a Toyota 4-wheel drive. When the rangers asked locals if they'd recently seen such a car, they heard from several that a bunch of hippies living in the area drove a red Toyota 4-wheeler. The rangers began searching for the hippies. 2 days later, Park Ranger Dick Powell was on patrol when he saw a red Toyota 4-wheel drive in the distance. Tex and several women were out on a ride. Tex managed to scurry off into the brush, but Powell questioned the girls before letting them go. He recorded the Toyota's license plate number. Back at the ranger station, Powell discovered that the license wasn't registered to the Toyota. Park Service officials notified the California Highway Patrol, and plans were discussed to send a joint team into the desert to find the car and those who were using it. The day of the arson, the family also got the stolen green Ford stuck in the trees. This, too, they stripped of worthwhile parts, but forgot to brush away the tire tracks. That night, the family rode around in dune buggies through the desert, cheering and yipping like coyotes in jubilation. Their celebration was premature. The next day, Officer Manning of the California Highway Patrol found the smashed '69 Ford near Hunter Mountain, plus tire tracks from the Toyota. Back in Los Angeles, County Chief Coroner Thomas Noguchi held a press conference on September 19th about the Cielo Drive homicides. He listed the names of the victims and the number of wounds and beatings they suffered. He suggested that drugs might have been involved, and that likely the murders were committed by more than one person. He also mistakenly announced that Sharon's red Ferrari was stolen the night of her murder. It was actually in a repair shop. Noguchi later said he was of the mindset that the Cielo Drive and Waverly murders were connected, but there was no evidence that he shared this opinion with others in the days and weeks immediately following the autopsies. On the 21st of September, Charlie and Clem creepy crawled Crockett's place. On the 22nd, some of the women drove the Toyota into Hall Canyon near Ballarat. They were exploring the area's mines and waterfalls, but encountered a park ranger and a CHP officer who wrote down their license plate number. The men weren't able to look it up that day, as they didn't have a working radio. But shortly thereafter they discovered that the license was registered to a 42 Dodge belonging to Gail Beausoleil, true name Massman, Bobby's ex-girlfriend. On September 23rd, Mary was finally released from civil brand. She stopped at Spawn Ranch, then raced to Wisconsin and her parents, who had Pooh Bear following the August 16th raid. On the 24th, Park Ranger Powell and an Inyo County Sheriff's officer named Dennis Cox began looking for the hippies they encountered in Hall Canyon 2 days before. Some miners in the area told them the girls had split, but park rangers and other officers started asking questions around Ballarat. Everyone there had either heard of or seen the crazy barefoot hippies and were happy to tell the officers to check out Barker Ranch. 5 days later, the arson investigation led police to the family. Park Ranger Powell and California Highway Patrolman James Purcell drove out to Barker Ranch on September 29th. Though they didn't know whether they'd find the red Toyota four-wheel drive there, they knew that hippies were living on the property. But Charlie had almost everyone in the family out searching for the bottomless pit, and the officers found only 2 young women. They gave vague answers to questions, and there was no sign of the vehicle. Frustrated, Powell and Purcell headed back out into the desert. Not far behind Barker Ranch, they passed a truck driven by Paul Crockett, with Brooks Poston in the passenger seat. The officers flagged down Crockett and asked him and Poston if they knew anything about some hippies who drove a red Toyota. It was the opportunity Crockett had been waiting for. He and Poston poured out descriptions of a crazy leader named Charlie and his drugged-out followers, how these weirdos had sex orgies and weapons, and Charlie had them all believing that he was the second coming of Christ. The family talked about killing people, and evidently they had. The officers needed to catch them because they were dangerous. Powell and Purcell decided to check out the immediate area around Barker Ranch anyway. In a deep draw behind the property, they found 7 young women, most of them naked. Purcell and Powell attempted to question the women, but as with the 2 girls they'd interrogated on the ranch, they received only vague, nonsensical responses. With no valid reason to arrest the 7 women, the officers reluctantly let them go. But they continued their sweep of the area and came upon 2 vehicles concealed beneath tarps. One was a dune buggy, and the other was a red Toyota four-wheel drive. The vehicles both had gun scabbards welded to their frames, and there was a rifle in each scabbard. The lawman wrote down the vehicle identification numbers and rushed back to Ranger headquarters to check their registrations. Before they left, they removed several engine parts from the Toyota to disable it. The officers confirmed that both vehicles were stolen. Members of the National Park Service, the California Highway Patrol, and the Inyo County Sheriff's Office coordinated efforts to raid Barker Ranch. Charlie heard from the girls about the cops sniffing around and panicked. He was also upset that Clem failed to find the 2 missing girls. Leaving Tex in charge, armed with a shotgun, Manson drove to Los Angeles to try to locate Sherry and Barbara. But while Charlie was away, his #1 killer got tired of waiting. Allegedly, Watson saw the 2 rangers approach Barker Ranch, and he took off in a station wagon. He made a beeline to San Bernardino. He knew his time was short, even though what he told his mom on the phone was, "I've found Christ." He called to ask them to wire him money. When he received the dough, he headed straight to LAX to catch a flight back to the Lone Star State. There he reunited with his folks, who were disturbed by the changes in the young man. According to Watson, "I slept most of the time, ate little, and threw up whenever I tried to please her by downing one of her huge Texas meals. I didn't wash, just lay around watching television blindly with the shades drawn, screaming at my parents to shut up if they tried to speak to me." On September 30th, police sent up spotter planes to scope out Barker Ranch and the surrounding area. The family were deep in hiding, however, and were unaware they were being surveilled. Those final days of September were very tense, very unhappy for Charlie's followers. By that point, most knew about the murders that summer, but they were trapped, and they knew it. They were awake by night, sleeping by day, heavily armed and guarded. Charlie, back from LA, was furious about Watson's disappearance. He spent countless hours preaching about Armageddon, warning everyone that the shit was coming down. During one of his late-night tirades, Kitty fell asleep. She was 5 months pregnant and miserable. Manson punched her several times in the face as punishment. On October 3rd, Brooks and Paul Crockett went to Independence to talk with County Deputy Sheriff Don Ward. They told him everything about Manson and the family, including Charlie's theory of helter-skelter. The sheriff recorded the conversation. Again, the writing of helter-skelter on the refrigerator at the LaBiancas was not reported in the press or to law enforcement this far from Los Angeles, so it didn't raise suspicions with that officer. In a desperate attempt to secure food and supplies, Charlie and Cowboy Bill left Barker Ranch on October 8th for Los Angeles. Manson sent Bruce and a couple others to Vegas to get supplies, but he had to make sure they had enough. After a week in Texas, Watson was ready to ditch his family. "I tricked my parents out of some money, got my father to drive me to Dallas to see a friend, and then called them and announced that I was going back to Los Angeles to pick up the insurance money due me from the automobile accident in January of 1968. But Watson lied to his folks and flew instead to Mexico. He wandered aimlessly through the resort communities around Puerto Vallarta for a week or two, making friends among the young transients and scoring my first grass since the drugs had run out in the desert. But it was no good. Charlie was pulling me." Tex returned to the Los Angeles area, staying on Venice Beach. By the 1st of October, Sadie Mae Glutz could no longer hold her tongue about her summertime exploits. She didn't come out and say she killed anyone, but she did tell several people that she stabbed someone in the legs after they pulled her hair. Kitty overheard Sadie's claims, and she begged Atkins to please tell her what had become of Bobby Beausoleil. Sadie spilled the beans about Hinman. Kitty was despondent to learn that her boyfriend was in jail on a murder charge. She'd been able to bear Manson's brutality as long as she had Bobby to protect her, but now he was gone. She bonded with Stephanie Schramm, also feeling Charlie's wrath and also pregnant. The 2 teens decided to escape. In the evening on October 9th, while Charlie was in LA, Stephanie and Kitty snuck out of the ranch after sunset, into the desert. With no food and in pitch darkness, they got lost, but kept going.